Welcome to episode 143 of Real Health Radio. You can find the links talked about as part of this episode at the show notes, which is www.7, so the word all spelled out, seven-health.com/143. A couple of times a year, I take on clients, and client work is the core of my business and how I spend the vast majority of my time. And after working with clients for the last decade, I feel confident in saying I'm very good at what I do. And yes, I help clients with various symptoms, but actually it's much bigger than just removing symptoms. These are struggles that these individuals are obsessed with and are defined by. Their problem has become how they identify and think about themselves. My clients have often worked with multiple practitioners and are on the verge of giving up, and it really isn't uncommon for me to be the fourth or the fifth or the sixth person they've come to. And where I see myself being different to others is by combining science and compassion. So I'm evidence-based in what I do and have a strong grounding in physiology and why the body is functioning how it is. But at the same time, I'm compassionate and I listen to the mental and emotional side of the client's experience and know that these aspects are of equal importance to health as the physical side of things. And one of the aspects I like most about the work that I do is how positive the process is. People believe that they're going to have to give up so much, that it will be painful in so many ways, but they'll convince themselves that it's better for their long-term health. But what they find is that the change actually adds to their quality of life. They enjoy the change and their new life. Their physical, mental, and emotional health improves now, not in some distant, far-off time in the future. And after working together, my clients regain what they thought was impossible, having their period again, conceiving, feeling energized, purposeful and alive, and walking by a mirror without the dread of seeing their own reflection. I put out so much free material. The podcast is free, the blog posts are free, and while the free material I put out I stand behind, it is much more general. You have to discern what is and isn't relevant for you. But when we are working together, I'm the one who can sort through this and show you what is important, what is the low-hanging fruit, and what are the levers that will make the most difference. So if you want this kind of precision in helping you with your recovery for better health, now is your chance to work with me. If you're interested in finding out more, you can head over to www.7-health.com/help, so HELP, and there you can read more about how I work with clients and apply for a free initial chat.
Welcome to Real Health Radio. Health advice that's more than just about how you look. And here's your host, Chris Sandel.
Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Real Health Radio. I hope you've had a nice week. So this week on the podcast, it's kind of a hybrid episode. So a couple of weeks ago, I released an episode where I interviewed a past client of mine called Julie, which if you haven't listened to it, I suggest checking out. I got lots of nice messages about it. Well, this is an interview with a past client called Florence Gillet. But the reason I say it is a hybrid episode is because Florence has now gone on to train as a eating psychology coach and has recently set up her own practice. So the second half of the conversation is covering this and talking about some of Florence's areas of interest and the topics she wants to be working on with clients. So let me read out Florence's bio. So Florence Gillet is a certified eating psychology coach, a recovered dieter, a feminist, and a mother of two. She helps chronic dieters reclaim their freedom of body and mind without passing on fatphobic, weight bias values to younger generations. Her professional practice combines strategies from nutrition science and eating psychology to restore a happy, healthy relationship with food and body. She believes that working together, we can claim back our power and inspire our children to find theirs without stigma or fatphobia. So Florence, as she talks about as part of this episode, has a long history connecting with Nicola Rinaldi, who I've had on this podcast twice before. Nicola is phenomenal with the work that she does around hypothalamic amenorrhea, or HA. And, well, it was actually Florence who first reached out to me and sent over Nicola's book. And so I'm forever grateful that she did this and put us two in connection with one another. We talk a little bit about HA and Florence's history about that. We chat about Florence's focus on raising kids with healthy relationships to food in their body. We go through talk about her quest to normalize acne and her own experience of dealing with acne, especially as an adult. The lack of resources around body positivity and health at every size and intuitive eating in French, which is her native language. And we also chat a little bit about her progress or process with setting up her new practice. And this is as well as going through the work that we did together and the work that she'd done with other practitioners before working with me. And I really enjoyed chatting with Florence, and considering this is the first podcast she's ever done, she's very succinct and well-spoken, especially considering English is not her first language. So please do check out her site at beyondbodyimage.com. So that's enough as an intro. Let's get on with the show. Here is my conversation with Florence Gillet. Hey, Florence, welcome to the show.
Hi, Chris. Thanks for having me.
So this interview is going to be a little bit sort of two parts. So the first part, I mean, you were a client of mine, so it would be good to have a bit of a chat about that process. And then subsequently to that, you have now gone on and become a coach yourself and are starting to practice. So I really want to chat about those things and where you're going to be aiming with clients and yeah, it's all very exciting because it's all very new. But I guess to start with, do you want to explain a little about your background and why you first got in contact with me?
Yes, of course. That would be my pleasure. So between the age of 26 and 36, I was suffering from disordered eating. I would identify it as orthorexia. I'm sure most of your listeners know what I mean by that. It's kind of this obsession with eating super healthy and making sure that you don't eat any junk food. And it's most of the time also talked about as clean eating. But when it becomes a bit of an obsession, then it can be really detrimental to your health. And so, for me, it was a mix of past trauma in childhood, but also moving away from my country, starting life as an expat. And I think all of those circumstances made me a little bit kind of obsessive about how much I would exercise and taking exercise as a pastime, and then looking a little bit too much at getting my five fruit and vegetables a day. It was a big campaign at the time when I moved to the UK.
Yeah.
And, I think I got the first few compliments about, wow, you lost weight, you look great, blah, blah, blah. And then I was down that rabbit hole really quickly. It took me a long time to actually get out of it properly. And I got in touch with you because I was probably a year into my final recovery, because I went through a relapse. But I felt like I was still struggling with really being able to listen to my own body cues, and, obviously struggling with a lot of digestive issues, but also chronic acne and stuff that is typically related to also the kind of hormone imbalances that you can create by going through a long time of disordered eating. So that's a little bit the background.
Okay, and I know you had worked with other practitioners before me. Can you talk briefly about like what you'd worked on with them and then how they helped? Because I know that they had been helpful in different areas.
Yeah, I would love to say you were the only one who found the magic cure, but it was quite a long journey to recovery. And as I said, I consider myself to have gone through 2 different recoveries. The first time that I really recognized that there was something wrong with the way I was eating and exercising, and that I realized that I was actually underfed and over-exercised was when I came off birth control. Got really excited trying to conceive, and realized that my period never came back. And obviously, I went to the OB, GYN, and then we ran all the tests, and then she told me I had something called hypothalamic amenorrhea, which is the scientific term to say that you have actually lost your period for 3 months or more. And at the time, I was completely lost. I just had no idea what that was or what I could do or how curable this was. And I was really feeling horrible because obviously once I didn't get the hormonal support from birth control that was kind of working towards regulating the hormones that my body couldn't make anymore because I was actually not feeding it properly. I felt really, really bad and weak, and I had terrible acne. And so at that time, I was very, very lucky. I met a lady called Nicola Rinaldi, which you've also interviewed on the podcast.
Yep.
She's really the #1 global expert on this topic of hypothalamic amenorrhea. At the time, obviously, I didn't know that she would become this expert, but I got super lucky to meet her. And through her work and her advice, I actually recovered completely naturally. I put on weight, I stopped exercising, I gave my body the rest that it needed, and I was able to conceive. That's what I would consider my first recovery. Now, at that time, I didn't know about mental health being such a big deal, and I didn't really do any of the kind of background work that I needed to do to really recover. So what happened was, obviously, I got pregnant, I got kids, and it was all fine. And for a while, I didn't really think of my body's appearance or anything, because when you're, becoming a mother, you don't really have a lot of control over that. And I'm fairly standard sized, so there was no major concern with my size at the time. But then once I was done with having kids and breastfeeding and all of that, I started looking into my diet again because, as I said, I hadn't done any of the body image acceptance work that I needed to do. And at the time, I was completely oblivious to that. So also, once I had my first child, I got diagnosed with the thyroid disease and then another skin disease. So those two are autoimmune diseases. And autoimmunity also runs in my family. There's genetics for that. So at the time, I started researching that topic. And this is how I fell into another rabbit hole called gluten-free and dairy-free and, removing all the potential ingredients in your diet that apparently, could make your autoimmune diseases worse. And obviously, I bought into that immediately. Also because it was supposed to make my acne better, which was also something that was of great concern for me at the time. And then I went through another phase where, again, I was probably underfed and overexercising and completely obsessive about what I could not eat, what would really harm my body. And if you think about it, right, bread cannot do that much harm. It sounds ridiculous to me now, but at the time I was completely lost into it. And then happened a time in my life where I lost my job, and I was into that phase where the obsession with food on top of it made me completely overwhelmed. I didn't know anything anymore about where I want to go in life, what I want to do, what my issues are. And at the time, I decided to start talk therapy. So I got a therapist for the very first time and started talking to her about, issues that I felt I had, because obviously I also felt a lot of anxiety related to the food, but also, the overall life situation, and it was all mixed up in my head. And so, and that was 2015. And then a few months later, I would say 6 months later, I stumbled across a podcast called Finding Our Hunger. It was done by Kyla Prince. She doesn't do it anymore, but you can probably still find it on iTunes or other platforms. And that podcast was really about, self-acceptance and fat acceptance, body positivity, feminism, and that. Listening to that at that time where I was, it just blew my mind. I was suddenly introduced to a lot of values that I just didn't live by for 35 years, and this is when I really started my final recovery. And then, I worked with you after that because I still felt like there was a lot of food fears and difficulties in really regulating the way that my body would function. I learned through you that I wasn't actually still not eating enough, although I was recovered weight-wise. And then the last bit of it was this year. Not this year, sorry, it's now 2019, 2018. I went through cognitive behavioral therapy, and that helped tremendously in helping the really deeply seated issues with I'm not good enough, I need to be perfect, how can I stop talking to myself negatively. And then, also I started coach training. I felt like that's a field that really appealed to me, that I was passionate about, not only to share my own experience and maybe even helping one person in that same situation, but also in terms of really changing the world that we live in. And I felt strongly that I didn't want to pass on the same issues to my kids, because I think a lot of my own beliefs in that field were really coming from my upbringing. And, my parents never intended harm with me. I don't think any parent does it in a bad way, but sometimes we can actually pass on body hate to our kids. So that's why I went into coach training and decided to become a coach.
Okay, and that's something I'm going to delve into in more detail in a bit. But what was it specifically that you came to me for help with? I mean, I know you touched on it briefly there with sort of fears around food. Was that it, or was there something else that you were hoping to get out of our work together?
Well, definitely, I think there was a bit of the aftermath of going through 2 periods of extreme restriction and then recovery. So digestively, obviously, your digestive system struggles going through restriction. And then suddenly, I personally didn't really experience binges, but definitely my digestive system was all over the place from getting into recovery and allowing myself to have all the foods I had denied for such a long, long time. And then it was also for me to try to see how I could really reconnect to my body's own feedback. So, I remember at the time, like I still had a few symptoms here and there. A lot of it was about digestion, but it could also be acne and stuff. And I really wanted to see if there was a better way. And unfortunately, I still didn't have the cues for just, hunger and fullness, for example, because again, when you go through restriction a very long time, you just lose the cues of natural appetite and, society and all of that. So I learned through the work that we did together that I really needed to feed my body even more than I was doing. And I think that helped me also reassess how much food I really need, and then disconnecting that physiological need from the beliefs that I used to have, beliefs that that ingredient is really bad, or this is going to make me even more sick with, thyroid or autoimmune diseases, or, all sorts of negative self-talk or guilt or shame that you have when you actually come from an eating disorder background, and you just want to eat normally, in between brackets. So I felt like what I liked about what I could see that you were posting and all of that is that you were in the nutrition field, and you would probably be able to get me onto a more balanced approach to food, but also that you would not, for example, put me through an elimination diet or stuff like that, which I was absolutely not able to do any of that at the time. So it's kind of also, reconnecting to the body feedback, and then really looking at how I feel when I eat this and I don't eat that, and looking at foods in a non-moral based view, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And so what improvements or what change did you notice with us working together, and as part of that, like how did your eating change?
Well, I'd say that, to be honest, the food fears, it took me a while to really get them completely out of my life, but it was definitely my first step into realizing that some of the foods might make me feel actually not great, but again, I shouldn't fear them. You know what I mean? Having cake once in a while, even if you react somehow to gluten, is no big deal. So that was one part. But what I really enjoyed with working with you was also that you would look at the food and, the nutrition, but also very much into the mental health part. And for me, introducing different ways that I could look at my relationship with food, but also related to, how is my life in general. I think that was putting the seed that actually made me today an eating psychology coach. And, that for me, that you cannot disconnect what happens with food with what happens in your mind and in your heart and in your head. Because you could have the most perfect diet and only eating greens and all of that. But at the end of the day, if you hate your body in the whole process, you're actually creating a stress response, and that actually defeats the purpose that you're trying to achieve with great nutrition.
And I mean, just going back to something you said earlier, where you said you didn't have good hunger cues in terms of hunger or fullness, and that comes from a place of restriction for many years or a decade. I would also add that for people who haven't had any restriction but are living under a lot of stress, I mean, stress really impacts on our ability to listen to our hunger and fullness and to be able to digest our food properly. And so from my recollection, that was also a big component of getting you to pay attention to, okay, what else is going on in your life at the moment that could be impacting on your digestion or could be impacting on that meal in the morning, etc.
Absolutely. Yeah, completely. And then one other thing that I remember very clearly is also the work you had shared on another podcast about the adverse childhood experience.
Yeah.
And, for me, it was once again kind of acknowledging, well, obviously, if someone has a lot of childhood trauma, it makes them a little bit more sensitive to some of the issues that they can have with whatever addiction or food or all sorts of different things that will allow them to actually somehow numb the feelings that they have. And I think it reinforced the fact that I did need a lot of support mental health wise, and that I think a lot of that support I denied myself for a very long time. So part of my job here also as a coach is to really bring more awareness to mental health, because this is something that there is really no shame to talk about. So that's also something that I probably learned from you.
Okay. And when you were sort of cataloguing all the different practitioners that you worked with, you seem to have, and maybe you're leaving certain people out who just didn't do it for you, but you seem to have a pretty good strike rate in terms of each person you mentioned did something very helpful for you. And I just want to underscore that I don't think that's always the case for people. Sometimes it takes 2 or 3 or 4 therapists to get the right person that you just really gel with. And so, yeah, did you have any experiences where it really didn't work, or were you pretty lucky on that front?
Well, I have to be very honest. The first therapist that I worked with, obviously, I had no good experience in choosing the right therapist for me. And when I started working with her, I was still very deeply entrenched in disordered eating. At the time, she had basically diagnosed that I was not in an eating disorder. So to tell you, that it went 100% right would be lying. But
Okay.
I think what was great is that, for the level of knowledge that I had at the time, just actually meeting someone and being able to share some of my thoughts or issues, or really untangle some of the feelings and all of that. So it was helpful. So I can't say that she was the best therapist ever. And recently, we had another little example where she saw me years after, and obviously I had put on weight, but, no big deal. And she actually asked me if I was pregnant. And I was like, this is so inappropriate, because, you are meeting someone who you ended up knowing that they had really a disordered eating behavior going on. And now you're meeting them years later, and the first comment you make is on their body's appearance. Probably not the best thing to do. But and then, yes, some other programs, like I remember signing up for a program online that was really about, forgetting about being too perfect and trying to really get over the perfectionism chase. And that didn't really do it for me. So there's definitely trial and errors. But I think you somehow always get something out of it. But what I would say is, obviously, it was definitely an investment in time, in effort, in money. I was, mental health is not always covered by insurance. I'm an expat, so unfortunately I don't live in my own country, and I rely on private insurance. So, but I still feel like this was the best investment I could have ever made. There's no doubt about it. And even though some of those therapists were not the best, they still somehow brought me onto, a next level. And then from that next level, you reach another one, and you meet someone else, or you see a coach online. I mean, I worked with Kyla Prince, the lady who was running the podcast, that really kind of blew my mind at the beginning. And that was super helpful for me too. So the more you learn, the more you're able to also pick the right help and support, right?
Yeah.
So I feel like you have to just get on with it and figure out what you need to let go in saying, okay, that doesn't serve me anymore. And then other stuff that, you say, okay, I want more of that. How am I going to find this? And I'm very grateful for the internet, because I wouldn't have found any of those practitioners, most of those, except the 2 therapists I saw here where I live. Most of the other practitioners I encountered and worked with was thanks to the internet.
And so since finishing up, and you've already alluded to this, we've chatted about it briefly, you've become a coach yourself. So what training did you do, and what did you get out of this training? Just because you seem to have been in this space for such a long time, you've worked with different practitioners, I imagine you've read a lot of materials. So yeah, what extra did you get out of that training that you did?
Yeah, so definitely there was a lot of stuff that was self-taught. Through my recovery and the kind of 2+ years that I was in active recovery, I think I must have read like dozens of books and listened to hours or weeks of podcasts and audiobooks, and it was great. It's also something that motivated me to keep going in that direction, because I just felt so passionate about listening to all that stuff and reading all that stuff. But I chose to follow a training given by Mark David and his team at the Institute for the Psychology of Eating. And what really kind of made me convinced about going down that route is that the training is very much rooted in health at every size values and is non-weight centric. But it really talks about how your eating challenges and your ability to have a healthy relationship with food is influenced not only by your nutrition, but also, and actually in a probably much bigger scope, by your thoughts and your beliefs and your feelings and areas of your life that actually impact you. So whether it's, your family, your primary relationships, work, stress, anything that really puts any sort of pressure on you sometimes can become an eating challenge motivator, in the sense that, okay, how am I quickly going to find comfort because I have all these issues around me? It could be actually getting into finding comfort in food, for example. And so that training really kind of resonated with me, because I felt like it was combining the nutrition, because I did learn a lot about nutrition through that training too, and that's something that really interests me, to have some sort of more scientific background to it, but also it's very strongly linked to mental health and all sorts of different issues that you can encounter in different areas of your life.
So we've chatted before recording this about different areas that you're going to be helping people with, and there's two big areas amongst others that I want to chat a little bit about. So the first is around like raising body confident kids. So can you share a bit about like your experience on this front with your own kids, and then you can talk more broadly about other areas as well that may be affecting others but haven't affected you?
Yeah, of course. So I think what motivated me at first was that I realized through recovery that a lot of the motivation for me to recover was actually linked to me having kids and then seeing my kids grow up in a certain way. So obviously, first recovery was recovering from hypothalamic amenorrhea.
You can just call it HA from now on to make it easier for us.
Can you hear? I'm struggling here. So when I first recovered from that, obviously the objective was to conceive. So somehow, my kids actually saved me one time, and then they saved me again because I got back into my own misery. The second kind of recovery that I went through as I had relapsed was motivated by seeing how my kids at the time, being 3 or 4 years old, had already picked up that I was not eating what they were eating. And I think I made the connection also with how I was brought up, and it just suddenly made a lot more sense for me as to, obviously, your kids are in a culture that is very much focused on body hate and looking a certain way and all of that. But I think there's still a lot that parents can do in terms of having the right narrative about how important is the appearance or not, and how much value we should put into our appearance. So, the more I look into that, the more I just want to support other parents, because a lot of the times what you see is that when moms are, and it could be dads too, but I personally talk about moms because this is really what happened to me. But when moms constantly go around with negative self-talk, even though they have the feeling and the impression that they're not saying that stuff out loud, or they're not talking to their kids about it, kids very quickly pick up on it. kids are so intuitive, and whatever you're going to say to them, for me, I never restricted my kids' diet, but they will still model what you do. So if mom says things like, well, I can't have carbs because it's going to make me fat, or they're going to say things like, okay, I really got to exercise because I had, cake or whatever. Kids actually pick up on that and say, okay, this is the right way to be a girl or a boy, and then a woman or a man. And that completely freaked me out. Like, I think at that time I was like, okay, I really need to change my ways, because I really don't want to have another generation going into the self-hate. I don't want another generation going into the, I gotta be perfect, or, I'm never going to be good enough. And then the more you look into that, the more you see stats, that are saying that 3 or 4-year-old children are scared to be fat, where you're just like, at 3 or 4, you shouldn't really be thinking about that stuff. And then I recently heard about another study that was done by a lady called Jerica Burge. She's in the University of Minnesota Medical School. That was really interesting. She basically made a study of teenagers, and whether those teenagers were encouraged to diet or not by their parents. And then she looked at that same population 15 years later. So those teenagers were now, in their 30s and being parents themselves. And she saw a strong association between the kids that were encouraged to diet by their parents as teens, and the rate of obesity that they had, the rates of binge eating, chronic dieting, unhealthy weight control behaviors, taking diet pills and all of that stuff. But still having the intuition to actually pass on more dieting advice to their own children. And so, the more I listen to that kind of studies and all of that, the more I feel like we really have a big responsibility as parents. And a lot of it comes down to actually fixing our own issues. Because whatever you're going to say to your kids, they're still going to do what you do. So it's kind of modeling the healthy relationship with food, the healthy relationship with body and appearance and acceptance, in a way that we want to give them the values to then go into a culture that is very much focused on how we should all hate our bodies or change them. So that is really something that I focus on, and that, you'll see a lot more of if you come and visit my site, for example.
And with the modeling piece, I totally agree. I've got a son, Ramsey, who's now just shy of 16 months, and he just does what we do. So he's now got a mini kitchen in our kitchen, and he'll come and make you a cup of tea, or he'll want to make eggs. And we haven't taught him how to do any of those things. He's just seen us do those things. And so they just want to copy you. And I'd also add that as kids get older, like, you are their hero. Like, you are the person that they look up to. And so if they get a sense that mom or dad, who I love and respect and just think the world of, if they have problems with their body, then I must also have problems with my body. And so I think that piece as well has a really big impact.
Absolutely. To be honest, it's very interesting to me, because I feel like even giving a lot of positive comments on appearance, I know I was raised, nobody ever told me to diet or change, to be very honest with you. A lot of it was very positive comments. Like, I was always very much praised for my appearance. But I think it can also actually unlock some of the feelings of, if I stop looking that way, then who will still love me? Yep. So you have to be super, super conscious of that. And again, I'm not blaming my parents at all. Like, I know my parents did it in a totally non-harmful way. Like they were really thinking they were doing the right thing. But actually the combination of sometimes, making so many comments on appearance, whether it's their own appearance, the child's appearance, anybody else's appearance, and then, having some of the negative self-talk that a child can witness is really quite toxic. So I really felt like I wanted to do something about it, just beyond the natural kind of, coach relationship. I really felt like I needed to talk to as many people as possible about that, because I think there's really something that we can do as parents, and, talking also in terms of social justice. So for me, it goes beyond just the weight or the fat acceptance, but it's also about discrimination in general. And now that my kids are respectively 7 and 8, I can tell you, I hear stuff at school that is just heartbreaking. And I understand that this is a part of growing up also, being faced with injustice and discrimination and dealing with it. But I still think that a lot of the narrative that I hear, I'm like, okay, is there a way that I can actually support my children, at least with the story I'm telling them at home, and how I'm behaving with them when we're in a family environment, so that they have, enough resources to really kind of answer those different pressures that they will basically face every day.
And just with the praise that you were talking about, if you're constantly praising someone, you're kind of alluding to the fact that should be a value. Because if you're praising them constantly, it's like, okay, this is something I need to tell you about. So I think that can then factor into to people then thinking it is more important. It also made me think of, there's a great book by Alfie Cohen called Unconditional Parenting, which I talked about in my end of year podcast as one of my favorite things that I listened to last year. And he talks about a lot of the problems with praising. And so I'm not going to get into that book, but I highly recommend people check it out. Even if you're not a parent, it's really helpful to have a listen, just because of how we talk to ourselves, how we parented ourselves. Get the Audible version. Alfie Cohen reads it, and he's great as a narrator.
I'd definitely look out for that one for sure. I think it's also for me, I feel like there's a lot of the kind of narrative also around girls and, gender. That I definitely grew up with, and that I feel like it's really urgent we change it, because it also hurts boys. And I think, a lot of my recovery was based on becoming a feminist. It's not something that I actually grew up with. I didn't grow up around women that were just really adamant about their own rights and what they should do. I grew up in a very kind of classic setup, of families where basically mom does all the work at home and, never complains and it's her space, if you want. And dad is just kind of going to work and bringing the money. And don't get me wrong, there's a lot of very strong women in my family, but unfortunately, the narrative that we used to give girls, and I think we still give it a lot today, is really kind of little girls have to be pretty and, it's the princess and all of that. Yep. And the boys have to be, then can get praised for how strong they are or how, athletic or whatever. And I think it's really important that we look into the values inside that we want to put forward, is how kind one person is, how ambitious or able to do all sorts of things. And this is something that was really, really important to me, raising one boy and one girl, that they would actually get praised for the right things and not for just fitting into a certain gender expectation, if that makes sense.
And just sort of touching on that piece there. So one of the things that I think is wonderful about you is you have an added gift of speaking multiple languages. And so your site is in both English and in French. And if I'm remembering correctly, you spent times in France and Belgium and other places around Europe. So what's body acceptance and non-diet scene like in different places that are not English speaking in Europe that you've been in?
To be honest, I was quite surprised at how little resources there were available in French. I mostly did the work in terms of figuring out what French resources were available. But the language of my recovery was English for sure. And I think it was a really pure luck that I was actually able to speak English and find all these resources, because the more I look into what is available in French-speaking countries, the less I see. So, it might be that they're less visible for me living as an expat, but I still look at simply like, can you actually get a health at every size book in French? Can you get intuitive eating in French? Well, you can't. So, there are definitely great organizations back in France that are actually militant for fat acceptance. And there are good resources, which I'm also listing on my site. So if we can link to that if anybody is French. But it's very marginal. And the narrative that I see around me when I visit home, which is Belgium, but the French-speaking part of Belgium, and a lot of our culture is very similar to France's culture, is that it's mostly fatphobic. It's mostly about the thinner the better, and there's definitely very little in the sense of just accepting one as they are and, not really looking too much at appearance or trying to get over that. So I remember a few years ago, I think it was 2 or 3 years ago, the mayor of Paris actually held a week-long event about discrimination. And at the time I was very surprised. They invited Jess Baker, who... Jess Baker, who's based in Tucson, if I'm not mistaken, which I get it. Jess Baker is an amazing speaker, and I get that, maybe they wanted to have one of the best to really speak there. But I couldn't help thinking, surely they should have found one French-speaking influencer or activist in that field, and I was very surprised about that. So I think it was close to my heart to actually hold, make the website and hold my consultations in both languages if people felt more comfortable with French instead of English. And so I will keep doing that, although it is quite a bit of work. But it's a lot of joy, and it's a good exercise for me also, trying to actually translate some of those terms, because it's very difficult to find references.
So the other area of interest that you want to work on with people is acne, and I know you talked about earlier it being a really big driver as part of your dieting, and then the rabbit hole that you went down with that. So can you talk about what you're wanting to do in terms of acne and how you're helping people in that realm?
Yeah, so the thing that I found out when I actually started this coach training is that I could see a lot of parallels between weight and acne stigma. For me, living in a standard-sized body, all of us, unfortunately suffer from the fatphobic culture, because even thin people still are scared to be fat, which was definitely my case. But I don't experience fat stigma, right? I don't suffer from not being able to fit in certain seats when I go to the cinema, or, being insulted in the street. None of that happened to me. But what I can see is that, when you suffer from acne as a chronic condition, and unfortunately mine started when I was 13 and it's still going strong today at 38. you do feel that stigma in the sense that acne is really something that is seen as shameful and, that shouldn't really happen, should be hidden, and that, it's disgusting, and that you're not actually taking care of yourself properly. While actually most of people will experience acne throughout their lifetime. We say, I think, about 80%. So hopefully for people will not stay a chronic condition, but at some point we are faced with it. And obviously, a lot of the times it has nothing to do with being clean or dirty or, eating all sorts of random donuts. There's a lot of factors at play. And for me, because trying to clear my skin really drove me into disordered eating, I felt like I really wanted to make that parallel. But also, I work a lot with the hashtag Make Acne Normal, because I feel like we need more representation. And I have to say, I have found so many great people online, again, that are really doing a lot of work in terms of showing their faces bare and really saying, yes, I suffer from acne, but I'm still the same person. Whether I wear the makeup or no, you will still find me as I am. And it is actually proven that also a lot of acne sufferers get kind of the feelings of a post-traumatic stress disorder on the long run, because they really, unfortunately, are not represented anywhere. And the media keeps telling us, that we should clear it, find ways to hide it and all of that. So it was important for me to not only post without makeup, for example, but also refer to some of the accounts that have inspired me to actually go around without makeup, even though I have an acne flare-up. And then seeing that, I'm still the same person, and whether you find me beautiful or not is actually irrelevant, if that makes sense to you.
It does. And what's been the response online from you posting this as part of your Instagram?
You know what? It's still early days, but what I love is that I feel like I have found a little community. And as with eating disorder recovery, connection is so important. I really feel like it has totally helped me. And it's a long process. It's a bit like body image work. It's not something that happens overnight, but on the long run, you will see that slowly, because you start seeing other people with the same face as you somehow, that you feel like, okay, it's really not such a big deal, right? And then you wake up one day and maybe you have a few more spots here or there, but it's not anymore the kind of end of the world. Oh my God, I just want to put a paper bag over my head and go to work like that. It's really about just, this is happening, and it's really no big deal at the end of the day. I'm just going to go through my day. I'm certainly not going to turn down opportunities or not show up to different events because I'm so embarrassed. I'm still going to go and live my life, because there are plenty of other people that are just as brave and do it, and that I see, their value, their inner value. And that really, for me, I see the beauty, but again, it's completely disconnected from beauty. I think nobody has to be beautiful.
Yeah, and I remember for myself, I suffered with acne probably from about 18 or 19 through to my sort of early 20s. And yeah, I remember it was a really tough time, and I was trying lots of different things to see if it would help my skin, and certain things did help temporarily, but it just luckily was one of those things I outgrew. And I think part of it was probably I matured, or I went through puberty a lot later than others. So it was probably what I was suffering in my late teens, early 20s was what people went through in their kind of mid-teens and late teens. And but I do know just how crippling it was in terms of my confidence, and it really did affect me. So to be able to have people online who are able to normalize that and as a point of support, I think would be really helpful.
Yeah, to be honest, I was someone who, as a teen, used to read all the teen magazines and all of that. And I wish I had seen someone like me, you know. I think it might have made me more accepting of it. And unfortunately, I went the other route where, you know, I was put on birth control very early. And so I think because my teenage years, you know, I didn't really let the whole process happen, if that makes sense.
Yep.
And then obviously my metabolism has suffered a lot through years of disordered eating. And then, you know, some people just have acne because it's purely genetic. There's really nothing that you can do to really get rid of it 100% unless you're willing to take medication. But again, you know, you have to really weigh the pros and the cons. And for me, I feel like I'd much rather live the way I am right now and not take medication that might have other side effects that might be a lot more serious. And, you know, I think having this little community seemed really important to me. So that's why I started focusing on that too.
Yeah. And so you mentioned Nicola Rinaldi earlier on, and you will forever have the honor of being the person who introduced me to her. So are you going to be doing work with HA clients? Is that going to be an area of focus for you?
So Nicola is forever has like a shrine in my house. She's, you know, without her, I'm not sure I would have gone on and have natural pregnancies. So obviously you can imagine the impact she has had on my life, but on many other women's lives. So I definitely will support her. I'm very lucky in the sense that I met her about a decade ago and we're still friends and we still exchange very regularly. I have always supported her work. You know, at first when I met her, she didn't have a book. And many of us on the online forum at the time pushed her onto really writing a book about this. I think it's a great resource. I wish it had existed when I was suffering from HA. Having one book with everything in, amazing. But I mean, in terms of, you know, really helping women with HA, I think obviously I have the benefit of having gone through that experience of what it means to recover, going all in, which is, you know, really stopping, exercising, and then allowing yourself to eat as much as you need, as much as you feel like eating. So that's an added benefit. But Nicola is still very much the number one expert in terms of helping women with the hormonal balance and the physiological part of recovery. The way that I'm wishing to support her and that I think we might work together is really supporting them on the mental health side. Because as I mentioned, when I recovered from HA at first, I didn't do any of the self-acceptance work. And then what we see happening over and over again is that the women that recover sometimes go on to have a baby or two babies. If they haven't done really the self-acceptance work and the mental health, the work on allowing themselves to let their bodies be where they need to be, you know, regardless of their appearance, then typically they tend to relapse. And so this is something where I think Nicola and me might be working in tandem. But for now, I just mostly, you know, support with some of the advice that I post on my website, that I share with some of her community groups, and definitely getting the word out about her book. I think it's very important that women know about it. You know, HA touches, I think, about 10% of the women's population, but unfortunately, a lot of the OBGYNs have no idea about it. So it was important to me to share about this specifically, yeah.
Yeah, and I know for me, the clients that I'm working with who have HA, more and more of them have already read Nicola's book when they come and work with me. So I think that's great. And if they haven't, I'm always pointing them in that direction of saying, okay, you need to read this while we're working together, because it will just give you so much a baseline knowledge. And I also want to just echo the point that you said there in terms of just doing the physiology piece in terms of increasing the food and decreasing the exercise and getting your period back. That in of itself won't protect you from future times of going down that rabbit hole if you haven't then done that mental emotional piece. And that's, again, when I'm working with clients, what I will do is do the physiological side, but also do the psychological piece, because that's the real insurance for it not happening again, but also to get the real freedom that someone is really craving as part of that, to be able to live in a way where they're not controlled by food, and they're not controlled by their appearance, and they're able to just get on with the more important things in life.
Absolutely. And the other thing that I want to add, and that's something that is coincidental, but it happened, is that I think when we met, Nicola and I, 2009, so that seemed like a really long time ago, we were both, I think, still very much into, and some of the book reflects that, is kind of how many calories and what kind of BMI should I aim for and all of that. And what I can see is that we've both grown so much into actually stopping to look so much at the numbers and really, going into the body feelings and, as you say, allow it yourself, having that freedom and not really thinking so much about how much or how many or whatever, but just feeling like if you're hungry and you really feel like having XYZ food, go for it. Just really feed your body. And I think a lot of, the work that we will do together will also kind of meet in that point, where it's kind of the mix between getting the balance right in terms of physiology, but also getting the narrative right in your own mind, right? So that's been really a nice thing to witness, that we had both grown onto that path to self-acceptance, and we're definitely very different from the ladies we were 10 years ago. So although we obviously don't see each other much because she's quite far away from me, but I have so much respect for the work that she does. It's been I've been extremely lucky to meet her.
Yeah. And so what's the process been like for you in terms of setting up your business and thinking about the website and the branding? I know that's always a headache to start with and can be quite difficult, but yeah, how have you found that?
So I actually come from a communications and marketing background. Okay. So somehow, I guess it was supposed to be easier for me. But yeah, I think it's totally different, though, when you look at how you're going to promote yourself, and that a lot of that promotion is also going to be about sharing your own story, and you're being very vulnerable, What I found was really important for me, as I said before, was not only to sell the kind of coaching services that I will have, but it's also to have a place where we can talk about more social justice. And the other thing that I wanted to consider very carefully is, because I am quite standard size, and I am talking a lot about fat acceptance or health at every size, or, weight stigma and all of that, I wanted to be very careful about the image that I portray. I think there's two things that I really want to avoid. Is one, putting my body too much into, the imagery supporting the brand. That's also why, my website is not called Florence something. I decided to call my company Beyond Body Image, because it's kind of a larger place to talk about different issues. And then, I didn't want to push forward one more body size that was actually standard. I felt like actually we don't need more women that are in the norm. If anything, we need representation for women that are maybe outside of that norm, whether it is, about the body's ability, whether it is race, whether it is, weight, acne, skin, whatever you mean. I think we need a lot more representation. So one of the people that I really enjoyed working with as well in terms of branding and making sure that I was sharing the right values for my website is Kelly Deals. I heard her talk on the podcast very early in my recovery in 2016, and she just blew my mind. She talks a lot about social justice, and one of the focus topics that she has is about the female lifestyle empowerment brand. I really encourage you and your listeners to look into that. We can link to that, I'm sure.
Yep.
What I love about it is that she really talks a lot about, when bloggers or coaches or, people that have good intentions at heart, but when they promote their own privilege as a way to then shame women that are not into that privilege, that is very, very destructive for the culture in general. So that is definitely something that I want to be very careful not to do, and where I also want to keep learning about my own privilege, whether it's, being white, being standard sized, being educated. I think I really need to open up to other people, other struggles, and this is something that I hope to do. Maybe we can talk about it again in a couple of years and see if I managed. But yeah, so that's why, a lot of what you'll do on my website, that you'll see my face, but it's never going to be a before and after picture. Before I was skinny and I was really sad and conflicted, and now I'm heavier and I feel so much better, but heavier is still very much in the norm. I felt like it was something that was actually not helping the overall narrative that we have in the culture. So yeah.
Yeah, and I know you've mentioned Kelly Deals to me before, and I've looked at her website, and she is someone I need to invite on the podcast. So yeah, thank you for pointing me in her direction. Florence, this has been amazing. Is there anything we haven't chatted about that you wanted to go through?
No, thank you so much for your time. I hope I wasn't too long. I didn't take too much of your time. And I really just enjoyed having that chat. I think it's great that, you're happy to relay all of those different messages. And I can't thank you enough for all the stuff that you keep posting as well. I'll still be listening very carefully to all the other podcasts because I always learn interesting stuff. So thank you very much.
Perfect. So once again, can you just tell listeners where they can go if they want to find out more information about you?
Yeah, sure. So my website is www.beyondbodyimage, completely spelled out. And then if they look for me on social media, it's a bit different. But I'm sure we can refer to that on the notes.
Yeah, I'll put all the links in. But yeah.
It's shorter because unfortunately the real Beyond Body Image was already taken. But it was a name that really resonated with me because I talk about a lot more than just body image. So this is where people can find me, and I look forward to hearing from anybody who would have questions or is interested to know more, or for me to maybe tackle some specific topics. I really hope this can be a place for connection and community and vulnerability.
Perfect. Well, look, this is great, and yeah, I do look forward to catching up in a couple of years when we can talk about how it's all been going.
Yeah, how well I've been doing with all the stuff that I promised, right?
Yeah.
That's an interesting one. Okay, thanks, Chris.
So that's it for this week's show. As I mentioned at the beginning, I'm currently taking on clients. So if you are interested in working together or finding out more about that, you can head over to www.7, so the word all spelled out, seven-health.com/help, so HELP. And that's it for the show, and I will be back next week with another new episode. Catch you then.
Thanks for listening to Real Health Radio. If you are interested in more details, you can find them at the 7 Health website. That's www.7, seven-health.com.